The alien capital was in chaos. Sirens screamed across the silver streets of Xeranth Prime, their sharp echoes bouncing off towering spires. The Queen's guards sprinted through the corridors of the royal palace, weapons drawn, scanning every shadow. Every citizen knew what had happened. Both of the Queen's daughters, the young royal heirs, had disappeared without a trace. Inside the palace's throne room, the Queen herself stood like a storm. Her tall, imposing frame was wrapped in battle armor etched with golden runes, her four sharp eyes glowing with fury. The air around her was tense, charged with the heat of her rage. No one dared to speak without her command. Finally, she snarled at her generals. "They are my blood. Find them. Tear this city apart if you must. Bring them back to me, alive." Her daughters were more than just heirs. In Xeranth culture, royal children carried the future of their entire people in their veins. Losing them would mean not only heartbreak for the Queen, but also political chaos across the galaxy. Rumors already spread through the city that an enemy faction had infiltrated the palace to take them. The palace gates slammed shut. No one was allowed in or out. Search squads fanned across the capital, scanning every street, every marketplace, every rooftop. Drones zipped through the air, broadcasting images of the missing girls. But hours passed, and there was no trace. Not even a scent trail the hounds could follow. Captain Rakhdar, the Queen's most trusted warrior, was the first to voice what many feared. "Your Majesty, if the kidnappers have already left the planet..." He didn't finish the sentence. The Queen's glare cut through him like a blade. Far away from the royal palace, on the quiet outskirts of the city, a small, battered transport ship sat hidden under a camo tarp. Inside, a human named Jack Cole lay stretched out on a makeshift bunk, his worn leather jacket draped over him like a blanket. The dim light flickered above him as the hum of the ship's heater filled the cabin. What no one knew, not the guards, not the palace, not even Jack himself until a few hours ago, was that two small alien girls were now curled up against his chest, sleeping peacefully. Their small scaled foreheads rested against him, their delicate claws clutching the fabric of his shirt. He hadn't planned for this. In fact, the moment they had stumbled into the abandoned docking bay where he was fixing his ship, his life had taken a sharp turn. Jack had recognized them instantly. Everyone knew the Queen's daughters from the news. At first he thought it was a trap, maybe an elaborate setup to frame him. But when he saw the terror in their bright golden eyes, he knew this was no game. They were shivering, frightened, and whispering words in a language he didn't fully understand. Still, he understood enough. They needed help. He had no idea how. They escaped the palace or why they were alone in the city. But he knew one thing: if the Queen's guards found him with them, he'd be executed on the spot. And yet, despite that, Jack couldn't bring himself to hand them over without answers. Something about the way they clung to him told him they weren't running from kidnappers. They were running from something else. In the palace, the Queen's fury was starting to turn into desperation. She stood on the balcony overlooking the city, her sharp gaze sweeping the skyline. Somewhere out there, her daughters were alone, perhaps cold, perhaps hungry. Her claws tightened around the railing until the metal bent under her grip. "Whoever has them," she whispered, "will beg for death before I am done." Back in the ship, Jack adjusted his jacket to make sure the girls stayed warm. He could feel their tiny hearts beating against him. He didn't know how long he could keep them hidden, but one thing was clear. The moment anyone found out, his quiet life as a backwater mechanic was over. And somewhere deep inside, he had the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The silence inside the transport ship was thick, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. Jack kept his eyes on the console, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The two alien princesses, now peacefully asleep against his chest, had managed to silence the storm of questions in his mind. Their tiny, green-scaled bodies rose and fell with every breath, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Jack allowed himself a brief moment of peace. But peace didn't last long. The ship's radar blinked. Someone was nearby, too nearby. Jack's heart skipped a beat. His hand immediately hovered over the control panel, fingers trembling as he adjusted the ship's cloaking system. His mind raced. If anyone saw the ship, if anyone heard it, the consequences would be deadly. He had no choice but to keep them hidden. "Jack," whispered one of the girls, her voice soft but carrying an unmistakable hint of fear. It was Aroth, the younger of the two, with golden eyes now wide open and alert. "They are coming." Jack met her gaze. "Who's coming?" The air felt colder as she spoke, her words fragmented by a mix of fear and confusion. "The ones who want us. They—" She paused, eyes flickering toward the door. Jack looked at her for a moment, unsure of what to make of her cryptic warning. He needed to act fast. The girls were scared, and even if they didn't know exactly who was coming, he had an ominous feeling that it was only a matter of time before the truth caught up with him. The ship shuddered as if responding to his growing unease. He stood and gently pushed the girls back into the corner of the small cabin, shielding them behind an old storage crate. Their eyes followed him nervously. "Stay quiet," he instructed, his voice firm but comforting. "Stay hidden. I'll handle this." He couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. The ship was no longer just a refuge for the frightened princesses. It had become a trap. He could feel the tension mounting as his hands gripped the ship's controls, his mind running through every possible escape route. Outside, the roar of engines grew louder. A massive vessel, the kind only the Queen's royal guard would use, cut through the air above them. Jack cursed under his breath. It was already too late to run. Meanwhile, back at the royal palace, the Queen had transformed from a figure of fury into something darker, more dangerous. She stood in the grand hall staring at a hologram of the city's skyline, her claws digging into the edges of the control panel. "I will burn this city to the ground if I have to," she muttered, her voice a low growl that echoed through the silent room. "Those who took my daughters will pay." Zalcor, the Queen's most trusted general, stood by her side, his face betraying a deep concern. The Queen was no longer just grieving, she was unraveling, and no one in the room dared speak out against her. "They were last seen near the mechanic docks," Zalcor said quietly. "It's possible that they've hidden among the humans." The Queen's 4 eyes glowed a deep red. "Humans? You suggest they ran to those filthy creatures?" Her voice was a sharp edge that cut through the air. "You may be right, Zalcor, but no matter where they are, they will be found, and when they are, we will make sure they never forget who they truly belong to." Zalcor bowed low, but his mind was elsewhere. Something about this whole situation didn't add up. The girls weren't just lost, they were trying to escape. But from what? He couldn't shake the feeling that the Queen's rage was blinding her to the truth. Back on the ship, Jack's heart raced as the Royal Guard's ship hovered directly above him. The communication system buzzed to life, and a stern voice came through the static. "Human vessel, you are in violation of restricted airspace. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. We are searching for 2 missing royal heirs. Cooperate, and no harm will come to you." Jack's eyes narrowed. The guard had no idea what was really going on. He glanced back at the sleeping princesses, who were now awake, their wide eyes locked on him. He wasn't about to give them up, not without a fight. "This is your only warning, human," the voice continued, more insistent. "You cannot hide from us." Jack clenched his fists. The last thing he wanted was to be caught in a war between the royal guard and two terrified little girls. But he had made a promise, one that meant everything to him. The Queen had no idea just how far Jack was willing to go. And as the royal ship descended to land, Jack made a decision. He would not allow the girls to be taken back into the clutches of the Queen. If it meant breaking the law, if it meant defying the galaxy itself, Jack would stand in their way. The engine of the royal ship grew louder, thundering overhead as it began its descent. Jack's hand tightened around the controls, but he knew there was no escaping what was coming. His mind raced as he quickly scanned the cabin for anything that could be used as a weapon. The girls were too small, too fragile to fight, but Jack wasn't. "We can't let them take you," he whispered to the princesses, his voice calm despite the chaos swirling outside. They stared back at him, their golden eyes filled with fear, but also trust. Aroth, the elder of the two, gripped his sleeve. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked softly. Jack nodded. "Yes, but I'm not going to let them take you." His voice was steady, but inside his heart was pounding. He knew that defying the Queen's royal guard meant certain death, but there was no other option. The girls were more than just heirs. They were his responsibility now. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. The ship's engines roared as the royal vessel touched down just outside Jack's hiding spot. A sharp knock echoed through the walls, followed by a cold voice from outside. "Human, you are harboring two royal daughters. Surrender them now and you will not be harmed." Jack's jaw clenched. He had no intention of giving up the girls, without a fight. But the reality of the situation was sinking in. There was no way he could take on the entire royal guard by himself. He needed a plan. He looked down at Aroth and the younger princess, who was trembling in his arms. "Stay quiet and stay hidden. I'll buy us some time." Aroth nodded, her eyes wide with determination. "We trust you, human." Outside, the guards' footsteps grew louder. Jack could feel the pressure mounting. If they forced their way in, he'd be out of time. He quickly checked the ship's systems, making sure everything was set to full power. The escape route was clear, but it was a long shot. The ship's cloaking system would be his best defense, but it wouldn't hold up for long against the advanced scanners the royal guard possessed. Just then, the door to the cabin rattled. A metallic clang signaled the sound of a heavy boot stomping against the ground. Jack cursed under his breath and quickly moved toward the control panel. His fingers hovered over the buttons. He had only one chance to make it work. The door flung open and two towering guards in dark armor stormed in, their weapons aimed directly at Jack. "Surrender now, human." One of them barked, his voice a deep, menacing growl. "Your cooperation is the only thing that will save your life." Jack stood tall, his hands raised in the air to show he wasn't armed. "I'm not handing them over," he said, his voice steady but firm. The guards' eyes narrowed as they took a step forward. "You have no choice." Jack's heart raced. This was it. They were moments away from taking the girls. He couldn't let that happen. He slammed his hand down on the control panel, activating the ship's thrusters. The ship jolted forward with a burst of speed, throwing the guards off balance. The guards struggled to regain their footing, but Jack was already in the pilot's seat, gunning the ship's engines. He heard the guards shout, but the ship was already lifting off, rising into the atmosphere. The ship's cloaking system hummed to life, its shimmering aura making it invisible to the royal ship's sensors. Jack breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The royal ship had launched a pursuit. He glanced back at the two princesses who were now curled up together in the corner, clinging to each other. "Hold on tight," Jack warned them, pushing the ship into hyperdrive. The stars outside the window stretched into long lines as the ship entered faster than light speed. They were out of the Royal Guard's immediate reach for now, but Jack knew it wouldn't be long before they caught up. The Queen's wrath was legendary, and if they were going to escape, they needed to be far, far away from Zirinth Prime. As the ship hurtled through space, Aeroth spoke, her voice shaky but determined. "Where are we going?" Jack looked ahead, his eyes scanning the stars. "Anywhere but here," he said. "We need to find a place where they won't follow." The ship's engines hummed steadily, and Jack allowed himself a brief moment of calm. They had made it out for now, but the real danger was still ahead. He didn't know who would be hunting them next, or if he could keep the girls safe. But one thing was certain. He couldn't let them fall back into the Queen's hands. The girls had already been through too much. He would protect them, no matter the cost. And if that meant facing the full force of the galaxy's might, then so be it. The stars outside the ship streaked past them in a blur as Jack pushed the throttle to its limit. The roar of the ship's engines reverberated through the cabin, and the trembling hum of the cloaking device kept them hidden, for now. He wiped sweat from his brow, his hands still gripping the controls tightly. The Royal Guard was out there hunting them down. The Queen would stop at nothing to retrieve her daughters. "Where are we going?" Aeroth asked again, her voice quiet but insistent. She was seated next to her younger sister, who was clinging to her protectively. The once feisty alien princess, so proud and regal, now looked small and vulnerable, the fear in her eyes a stark contrast to her usual fierce demeanor. Jack didn't look away from the view ahead. "We need to lay low. I know a place, out of the way, a safe zone, a backwater planet where no one will find us." Aeroth's gaze didn't leave him. "How do you know they won't find us there?" "Because they're not looking for us there. We'll be safe." Jack's voice was firm, though doubt gnawed at him. How could he be so sure? He wasn't even sure the ship would hold together long enough to make it there. But it was the only place he knew where they could breathe easy, even if it was just for a little while. The ship jolted again, a sharp, sudden shift that threw Jack forward in his seat. His fingers instinctively gripped the controls. What was that? The younger princess gasped, her face pale. "I don't know," Jack muttered, his eyes darting to the console. He saw the flashing warning lights. The tracking signal was active. The royal ship had caught up to them. The Queen's forces had found their trail. "They've locked onto us," Jack said, his voice laced with panic. He hit a button to send a distress signal, but he knew it was pointless. There was no one to help. The royal ship was closing in fast. He could see its silhouette now, just on the edge of his view screen, dark and menacing. Jack's pulse quickened. Aeroth stood up, her body trembling. "They're going to catch us." Jack clenched his jaw. "Not if I can help it." His fingers flew across the control panel. He adjusted the ship's trajectory, sending it into a sharp dive toward the nearest asteroid field. The ship's engines screamed as they shifted direction, the force of the maneuver slamming everyone back into their seats. Aeroth screamed, but Jack kept his focus on the field of rocks ahead. He'd done this before. Navigating through asteroid fields at high speeds wasn't easy, but it was their best shot. The Royal Guard's ship, with all its power and weapons, was still no match for the chaos of the floating asteroids. "Hold on," Jack shouted as he jerked the ship left, narrowly avoiding a massive rock that shot past them. The princesses were thrown about, their small bodies crashing against the walls. But Jack didn't let up. He swerved the ship again, dodging another rock. "Faster!" Aeroth yelled, panic rising in her voice. "I'm going as fast as I can," Jack responded, his eyes glued to the chaos ahead of them. He had to concentrate. One wrong move, and they were done for. But they had no choice. They couldn't outrun the royal ship for long. The asteroids were growing larger as they neared the heart of the field. Jack's hands were steady on the controls, but inside his thoughts were racing. The Queen was relentless. The Royal Guard had the resources to track them across the galaxy, and Jack knew they had only one chance. If they didn't shake their pursuers in the next few minutes, they were as good as dead. Suddenly there was a massive impact. The ship rocked violently as a piece of debris struck the side of the hull. Warning lights flashed. System damage. The ship's AI informed Jack in a calm, mechanical voice. Hull integrity at 75%. Damn it, Jack growled, his fingers pressing harder into the controls. We have to keep going, Aeroth shouted, clutching the side of the cabin to keep herself steady. Her voice was strained, but there was something more in it now. Something that told Jack she wasn't just scared anymore. She was ready to fight. Jack's eyes caught a glimpse of the royal ship, closing in on them, gaining speed. He could see the darkened bridge of the ship, the silhouette of the Queen's guards moving inside. They were coming for them. A blast of energy surged toward them, and the ship shook violently once more. This time, the lights flickered, and Jack was thrown forward, barely catching himself against the dashboard. Shield failure, the AI warned. Come on, Jack muttered to himself, pushing the throttle further as the ship plunged deeper into the asteroid field. Rocks were flying everywhere now, bouncing off the ship's shields, but the guard ship wasn't going to be stopped so easily. Through the flickering dashboard, Jack could see the royal ship's cannons charge up. Brace for impact, he shouted. He jerked the ship into a sharp roll, narrowly avoiding a laser blast that tore through the space behind them. The shockwave sent them spinning, tumbling through the asteroid field, until they slammed into a rock face. The ship groaned in protest, as its hull buckled under the impact, but they were still alive. Jack's heart was racing, his head spinning from the force of the crash. But they weren't done yet. The royal ship was still on their tail, and the Queen wasn't going to stop until she had her daughters back. He glanced over at Aeroth, who was now standing with her hand on the back of the seat, her face set in determination. She was ready to fight. And for the first time since he'd met her, Jack wasn't sure they could escape, but he wasn't about to give up. Not now. The asteroid field was chaos. Rocks of all sizes darted around them, each one a potential death trap. Jack's ship groaned as it narrowly missed another jagged rock, the hull straining under the stress. The royal ship was still hot on their tail, relentless, like a predator determined to catch its prey. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he guided the ship through the debris. The ship's dashboard flickered, warning lights flashing. The cloaking system was failing. They were running, out of time. His only hope was to outrun them, if that was even possible anymore. We're not going to make it, Aeroth said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was gripping the side of the cabin, her eyes wide with fear. Jack didn't answer right away. His focus was solely on the controls, sweat dripping down his face. He couldn't afford to lose his nerve now. The princesses were depending on him. He had promised to protect them, and no matter how grim the situation seemed, he wasn't about to break that promise. Suddenly, a loud crack filled the ship, followed by the sound of a blast that shook the cabin. Jack's grip tightened on the controls as the ship veered to the side, nearly spiraling into another asteroid. His heart raced. The royal ship had fired again. They've got us locked in, he muttered. If we don't find cover soon, we're done for. The AI's voice crackled through the speakers. Shield power at 30%. Hull integrity at 45%. That's not enough, Jack replied under his breath, his mind racing. He glanced toward the rear-view screen and saw the royal ship's cannons charge up again. There was no way they could keep running. They needed to fight back or they would be destroyed. Then Jack spotted something, off in the distance, hidden behind a cluster of asteroids. It was a small, uncharted moon barely visible in the chaos of the field. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. He slammed his hand onto the controls, sending the ship into a sharp turn toward the moon. The ship bucked, struggling against the damaged systems, but Jack didn't slow down. "Hold on!" he shouted, bracing himself as the ship jolted forward, weaving between massive chunks of rock. The royal ship followed close behind, but Jack's instincts were sharp. He knew he couldn't outrun them in open space, but the moon offered something he could use, an opportunity to lose them in its craters and narrow caverns. Behind him, Aroth and the younger princess held on, their faces tense with fear. Jack could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their trust pressing down on his shoulders. He couldn't fail them now. The royal ship fired once more, but Jack was already ahead of them, diving toward the moon's surface. He took the ship through a series of sharp turns, dodging rocks and blasting through tight spaces. It was a dangerous maneuver. One wrong move and they would crash. But it was their only shot. The royal ship was getting closer. Jack could see their pursuit reflected in the ship's rearview mirror. They were almost out of time. Then, just as the royal ship was closing in, Jack dove into a deep crater, the ship's engines screaming in protest as it plunged toward the surface. The moon's surface was rugged, filled with sharp cliffs and jagged rocks. But Jack didn't hesitate. He pushed the throttle harder, the ship shaking violently as they descended into the crater. Behind him, the royal ship followed, but they were having trouble keeping up. The terrain was too rough, and the size of their ship made it harder to navigate through the narrow tunnels and craters. Jack was gaining ground. A loud crash echoed through the ship, followed by the AI's calm voice. "Hull breach detected. Minor damage to rear." "Not now." Jack cursed under his breath, gritting his teeth. He couldn't afford another hit. He yanked the controls to the side, sending the ship into a tight turn. The royal ship fired again, but the blast missed, hitting the walls of the crater instead. Jack grinned, realizing he had the advantage. He was in his element now. He sped through the cavernous tunnels of the moon, weaving in and out of rock formations, the ship barely holding together. His breath came in short gasps, but he couldn't stop. Not when the princesses' lives were at stake. And then, as they neared the bottom of the crater, Jack saw it, a small opening in the rock. It was just wide enough for his ship to fit through. It was a cave, but it was their only hope. "Hold on," Jack shouted, slamming the ship into full throttle as he steered toward the opening. The royal ship was still coming. They weren't far behind. Jack could hear the roar of their engines as they chased him into the cave. The tunnel ahead was narrow, too narrow for both ships, but Jack had no choice. With a final desperate push, Jack forced the ship into the cave's entrance, the wall scraping against the sides. The royal ship tried to follow, but it was too big. It crashed into the walls, its speed throwing it off course. Jack didn't look back. He drove deeper into the cave, the sounds of the royal ship fading away. They had lost them, for now. The ship's engine sputtered as they neared a small underground chamber, the ship's hull grinding to a halt as Jack powered it down. The cave was silent, and the only sound was the heavy breathing of the princesses in the back. "We did it," Aroth whispered, her voice trembling. "We're safe. For now." Jack let out a long breath, finally allowing himself to relax. But he knew this wasn't over. The Queen would never stop searching for her daughters, and they were far from safe. But at least, for the moment, they were alive. And that was enough. The ship's interior was quiet. Too quiet. Jack leaned back in his seat, staring out through the small view screen at the dark cavern around them. They were safe, for the moment, but it didn't feel like it. The weight of their situation, of his promise to protect these two young alien princesses, hung heavy on his shoulders. The royal ship had been close, too close. But they had made it. The narrow escape through the asteroid field and the caverns of the uncharted moon had given them a brief respite. The only question was, for how long? Jack's eyes flickered to Aeroth and her sister, who were now sitting together at the back of the ship. Their expressions were weary, exhausted from the adrenaline and fear. But there was something else, something deeper. There was gratitude in their eyes, too. They trusted him now, fully. But the road ahead was still uncertain. Aroth spoke, her voice soft but steady. What happens now? Where do we go from here? Jack leaned forward, his hands resting on the ship's controls. He didn't know the answer. We keep moving. We can't stay here. The Queen won't stop. If she doesn't find us on this moon, she'll keep searching until she does. But where will we go? The younger princess asked, her voice shaking. They'll always find us. Jack didn't have an answer for her. He had been to dozens of planets, but he wasn't sure where they could run to, that the Royal Guard wouldn't track them down. He couldn't go back to his old life. Not after this. The galaxy's most dangerous force was hunting them. I'm not going to let them catch us, Jack finally said, his voice firm with resolve. He met Aroth's gaze. We'll figure it out, together. Aroth nodded slowly, her eyes hardening with determination. Together, she whispered. For a moment the ship was still. But as Jack sat there trying to think of their next move, a soft sound broke the silence. It was coming from the ship's outer hull, a faint scraping noise. Jack's instincts kicked in. He jumped to his feet, his hand immediately reaching for the blaster at his side. Stay here, he ordered the girls, his voice low but urgent. I'll check it out. The last thing he needed was to be caught off guard again. He moved swiftly to the ship's airlock and peered through the window. His eyes narrowed as he saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the dark, empty surface of the moon. But then, the scraping sound came again. He blinked. Something was moving outside the ship, just out of sight. He didn't take any chances. Jack activated the external cameras and they flickered to life on the screen. There, moving stealthily across the ship's hull, were several figures, cloaked in shadows. Damn it, Jack muttered under his breath. He knew exactly who they were. The Royal Guard had found them. The figures moved with precision, their advanced suits allowing them to traverse the moon's surface. They were getting ready to breach the ship. Jack didn't hesitate. He rushed to the cockpit, quickly locking down all exterior hatches. The girls were still in the back of the ship, unaware of the approaching danger. He had to protect them no matter what. A deep rumble echoed through the ship. The airlock door began to shake violently as someone, was trying to force their way inside. Jack's mind raced as he weighed his options. They couldn't escape without a ship, and the Royal Guard had already sealed off the landing bay. Damn it, he cursed again, his mind working overtime. The royal ship had already started to land outside the moon's atmosphere, preparing for a full-scale search. He didn't have much time. There was only one choice. Jack slammed a series of buttons on the console, activating the ship's emergency thrusters. The ship lurched into motion, pushing through the cave's entrance and out into open space. They were leaving their hiding spot, breaking the one rule that had kept them safe. But if they didn't act quickly, they'd be caught in the trap. Hold on, Jack shouted as the ship surged forward. The force of the sudden acceleration threw Aroth and her sister against the walls. We can't outrun them, Jack, Aroth cried, her voice panicked. I know, Jack called back. He was trying to stay calm, but the weight of the moment was starting to catch up with him. The Royal Guard was already on their tail, and he knew there was no escape from them now. But then, in a moment of desperation, Jack had an idea. It wasn't perfect, but it was all he had. He turned the ship's engines toward a nearby planet, a planet known for its dense atmosphere and heavy gravity. He wasn't sure it would work, but he was about to find out. "Stay quiet, stay hidden," Jack told the girls, his voice tight with determination. "This is going to be rough." As the royal ship followed them into the depths of space, Jack pushed the ship's speed to the limit. The ship's engines roared, vibrating with the strain as he punched through the atmosphere and toward the planet's surface. It wasn't long before the royal ship opened fire, their weapons sending energy blasts toward Jack's ship. But Jack wasn't going down without a fight. He sent the ship into a steep dive toward the planet's surface, hoping the dense clouds and rocky terrain would provide cover. The royal ship fired again, but Jack was already too far ahead, racing through the thick clouds of the planet's atmosphere. The Royal Guard's pursuit was relentless, but Jack wasn't going to stop until he had shaken them off for good. The ship plunged through the thick clouds of the planet's atmosphere, its engines roaring in defiance against the overwhelming pressure. Jack's knuckles were white as he gripped the controls, his eyes darting between the instruments and the view outside. He could feel the ship straining under the force, but he didn't dare let up. The Royal Guard was still following, their ship a dark shadow in the sky behind him. "We can't keep this up much longer." Aroth's voice trembled from the back of the cabin. She was gripping the seat beside her, trying to stay steady as the ship bucked and swerved through the storm. "I know," Jack replied through gritted teeth. His heart was pounding in his chest. He had pushed the ship too hard and he could feel it. The engines were overheating, and the hull groaned under the stress. But there was no turning back now. He couldn't stop. The royal ship's lasers flashed, cutting through the storm, narrowly missing Jack's vessel. The Royal Guards were relentless. They weren't going to stop until they had the princesses in their hands, or until they had destroyed Jack and his ship. Then, through the thick mist of the clouds, Jack spotted something, a valley below surrounded by steep cliffs. It was narrow, rocky, and hidden by the storm, but it was the perfect place to make their last stand. "We're going down," Jack called, his voice sharp and filled with resolve. He jerked the controls hard, sending the ship into a sharp dive toward the valley below. The ship screamed in protest as it plummeted, the ground rising up to meet them with terrifying speed. Aroth gasped, her hand instinctively reaching for her sister, who was wide-eyed with fear. But Jack kept his focus on the valley, threading the needle through the jagged cliffs. The royal ship, too large to maneuver through the narrow passage, was losing ground. Jack had one last chance to get them out of this alive. They were almost there, just a few more seconds. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the ship. The entire vessel shuddered, and Jack's head snapped forward as he slammed into the dashboard. The emergency lights flashed on, and the ship's systems began to fail. "Shield failure," the AI's voice echoed. "Hull integrity at 20%. Jack swore under his breath. They were falling, the ground coming up faster than he could react. He had only seconds to save them. His mind raced, but instinct kicked in. He pulled the ship back up, forcing the controls to respond as the ship swerved and jolted through the valley. The royal ship fired again, but it missed, the blast tearing into the cliffs instead. Jack's hand flew to the emergency release, and with a quick yank, the ship's thrusters activated one last time, pushing them upward. The ship groaned as it climbed, but Jack could feel the weight of the pursuit behind him. The royal ship was still on their tail. "We're not going to make it," Aroth whispered, her voice filled with resignation. "We are," Jack said, more to himself than to her. He didn't have a plan, no clear way to escape. But he wasn't going to let the Royal Guard win. Not after everything they had been through. The royal ship was too close. Jack could see their guns charging again, ready to finish them off once and for all. Then, out of nowhere, something unexpected happened. A powerful explosion rocked the royal ship, sending it spinning out of control. The sound was deafening, and the shockwave rattled Jack's ship. He jerked the controls to the side, narrowly avoiding a collision with the falling debris from the royal vessel. "What the hell?" Jack muttered, his mind racing as he scanned the sky for the source of the blast. He didn't have to wait long to find the answer. From the edge of the atmosphere, a new ship appeared, massive, sleek, and unmistakably human. The unmistakable. Markings of the Earth fleet were visible on the side, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. The Earth fleet had come for him. The royal ship, already weakened by the explosion, tried to regain control, but it was too late. The Earth ship unleashed another barrage of missiles, striking the royal vessel and sending it careening into the atmosphere. The force of the explosion lit up the sky, and the royal ship disintegrated into pieces, scattered across the stars. Jack watched in disbelief, his hand still gripping the controls, his breath coming in short, quick gasps. They had made it. The Earth fleet had arrived just in time. Aroth's voice broke the silence. "We're free," she said softly, her words almost a whisper of disbelief. Jack looked over at the princesses, who were now staring out the window at the wreckage of the royal ship. They were safe, at least for now. The Earth ship hailed them over the comms. "Human vessel, this is the Earth fleet. Stand down and prepare for boarding." Jack let out a sigh of relief, his shoulders slumping as he finally allowed himself to relax. They were safe. The Earth fleet had arrived to back them up, and the Royal Guard's pursuit had ended. He glanced back at Aroth, who was still in shock. Her golden eyes met his, filled with gratitude and something more, something deep and unspoken. "We owe you everything," Aroth whispered. Jack smiled, the weight of the past few days lifting off his shoulders. He had done it. He had kept his promise. And though he didn't know what the future held, he knew one thing for sure: he would always protect them, no matter what. Part 7 concludes the story with a dramatic escape and the unexpected arrival of the Earth fleet, turning the tide in Jack's favor. The princesses are safe for now, but the journey has changed them and Jack forever.